Thank you for joining me on this review of the Blackwater Valley Railway during 2019. I thought I would start with the BVR story, how it came about and has evolved over the years. We then look at some of the design and construction techniques used to build the BVR. Next, we see some live action featuring Connect, a much modified Roundhouse 30 class loco. Following on from this, we look at a rebuild of the Slate River Bridge. We see Petit Bleu and Accucraft Deckerville on her inaugural run. Then we move on to Murton Emerys, a rebuilt Steamcraft double fairlie. We take Samson for a test run after a full service and repaint. Then some short footage featuring locomotives from the Guildford Model Engineering Society, before closing this review with 3D modelling and printing techniques. I thought I would start with the BVR story, how it came about and has evolved over the years. My love for narrow gauge railways started my summer holiday to South Wales when I was a child. One of our days out we ended up at Devil's Bridge and the nearby station, which I later learned was the upper terminus of the Vale of Rydal Railway. I distinctly remember as an 8-year-old boy standing on the original bridge at the station's throat, being mesmerised by Owen Glendower bustling his way into Devil's Bridge station whilst giving me a hot steam blast up my short trouser legs. From that point on, my TT gauge Ginty tank never looked the same, and I was hooked on narrow gauge railways for life. I have been an active member of the Guildford Model Engineering Society and the Association of 16mm narrow gauge modellers for over 30 years. I have also been a regular operator on the GMES portable 16mm scale exhibition layout, much grumbling. So based upon experience, I had a number of initial considerations I wanted to include when I came to build the BVR, which were: the track was to be 32mm gauge with a minimum horizontal radius of 1400mm. The track bed must be reasonably flat so that manually operated locomotives will not struggle climbing hills or run away on a downgrade. Now I have to admit, as I'm getting older, I do not enjoy grovelling on the ground anymore, so the track bed should be elevated at least 700mm above ground. The track should form a continuous loop to enable coal-fired locos a decent run time before stopping. The track layer should have sufficient sidings for added interest and storage during open days. The elevated railway had to be made of materials that would be easy to maintain, would not rot, and include plant boxes for small plants and trees. The railway should have a reason for existing and tell a story to anyone visiting the line. And finally, the railway had to blend in with the garden and be acceptable to my better half Barbara. All railways have a reason for existing, whether that be full size or in miniature. The BVR was born out of the Ash Valley Railway, which was my first 16mm scale garden railway, albeit a very small one. When we moved to our current house, we were presented with a garden that was a blank canvas for us to paint on. Many garden layouts and track plans were considered before finalised on the one shown here. Having said that, the railway is still evolving, but the raison d'etre for the railway has remained the same. The BVR is a fictitious line based in the southwest of England. It has seen hard times, but fortunately a band of narrow gauge enthusiasts saved it from extinction and is now run as a preserved railway, which is a good excuse to run anything you like and cater for visitors. The seam of the famous West Country treacle was discovered at the end of the 19th century by Mr. Johnson, who was a local entrepreneur. He decided to extract the treacle and sunk a mine shaft in the area at what is now known as the Wheelbarrow Mine. Why Wheelbarrow? Well, I was pushing the wheelbarrow past the area one day and the name stuck. Johnson needed to get the treacle to Barkham, where he planned to build a biscuit factory, manufacturing his now world famous Johnson treacle biscuits. So he decided to build a 2-foot gauge railway, following the Festiniog railway practices to enable his precious treacle to be delivered to the factory. Johnson also decided to have his grain for the biscuits ground at the old watermill outside Barkham village. A railway spur was later laid to connect the mill directly to the railway. The other nearby village is Chuffham, which is separated from Wheelbarrow by the Slate River. The railway company built a large lifting bridge and viaduct to connect the two villages. Chuffham is a play on words linking the BVR to Cheltenham on the Linton and Barnstable in North Devon. There's a large waterfall between Chuffham and Barkham known as the Toffee Falls. This became a local tourist attraction and a dedicated station was built to cater for the ever-increasing tourist traffic. Our dog Toffee used to love sunbathing here whilst I was building this area, and her ashes are buried beneath this section of the railway. You will have probably deduced by now that I have used computer-aided design tools, better known as CAD, when laying out the railway. All of my working life has been spent on civil engineering design, latterly working on major highway and railway infrastructure projects where the use of CAD is very common. For the last 20 years I've worked for Bentley Systems, specialised in 3D design development and virtual reality modelling, primarily for the railway market, so it should come as no surprise that I adopted this methodology for my own railway. There are many CAD software packages available, but I use Bentley's MicroStage for all my 3D modelling because it's comprehensive, I know how to use it, and it does the job. From the layout plans shown earlier, I was able to generate construction plans and cross-sections for the main frames, which were fabricated from 65mm square plastic downwater pipe. Each main frame or unit was made as a complete entity, which was dropped into prepared bored holes in the ground. Hydraulic jacks were used to line and level each frame or unit, and once in their correct position were anchored in the ground with rapid hardening concrete, better known as postcrete. Once the frames were set in place, they were joined by longitudinal members, and cross pieces were then added which formed the track bed, which resembles a xylophone. The frame for the Toffee Falls station area was constructed as one big unit. Other areas of the railway were done in a similar vein, or the main support frames were put in the ground first, then joined up as I have just described. Once the main frames were in place, they were clad with treated timber decking capped with UV Flex flashing to stop water penetrating in the grain of the wood. UV Flex is a bitumen treated felt based material that has an aluminium mesh core. It's easy to cut and bend to shape. Recycled plastic sheet was used for plant boxes and non-temperature sensitive locations. Material cutting plans were produced from the master model. Unfortunately, the recycled plastic sheet I use is not thermally stable, and experience has taught me not to use this material for track beds where there can be significant temperature variations during the year. There's a lot of work to get this far, but a good foundation is essential to the successful longevity of a garden railway. We then come to the fun part, laying track. Pico SM32 flexible track and point work has been used throughout the railway. It is supported on 20mm thick PVC blocks, which were screwed to the main framework using thousands of stainless steel screws. The track is pinned through the sleeper ends to the block, with this time stainless steel pins. The track was then ballasted with 3mm pointing aggregate, which is primarily used for bedding and jointing block pavers on driveways. The ballast was then secured with diluted exterior grade PVA adhesive. So there we have it, a brief description of the design and construction process. Time to move on to some live action. My model of Knicks was inspired by a visit to the Llanfair Garden Railway show. Whilst watching trains running on the Timpton Lake Railway layout, I noticed a modified Roundhouse Bertie Basic Series loco sitting in the yard. I immediately saw potential for an elegant looking loco and purchased one from the Brambright stand there and then. When I got home, I showed the new model to my dad, who offered to buy it for me as a present. Lucky boy, I thought. My freelance locos are named after mountains I have climbed, so I decided to name the loco after a mountain called Cnicht in Snowdonia, North Wales. Cnicht was one of Dad's favourite mountains. As we had climbed the mountain together, it seemed appropriate to call the new engine by that name. If you stand on the cob adjacent to the Festiniog Railway's Porthmadog station and look inland up the Glaslyn estuary, you can easily spot Cnicht because it is the pointed mountain top between Snowdon and Malwyn Mower. It has been dubbed the Matterhorn of Wales. These construction photographs will give you an idea of the work I did before painting and lining the model. It was entered into the Roundhouse competition at the 2004 16mm Association AGM, and I was honoured to be awarded winner that year. Cnicht is manually controlled. She has been a very reliable runner, both at home, at GMS open days, and on the club's much grumbling exhibition layout. Then after a dormant winter period, she seemed to be somewhat sluggish to run. After stripping the engine down, I could not find anything wrong, but she continued to run erratically. So one day when she was sulking, I threw the regulator wide open. Then with a sudden cough and splutters, she was off like a scalded cat. I can only assume some old steam oil had become congealed in the superheater or exhaust pipe, and the sudden blast of hot steam cleaned them out. Anyway, Knicks is now back in fully working order and running a treat. Let's sit back and enjoy her run. When the railway was being built, I realised the construction of the bridge to span over the Slate River was going to be complex. The BVR directors were eager to run some revenue-earning trains, so to get the railway up and running, a temporary bridge was constructed from 20mm PVC and hardboard sides. This did the job for a while, but it started to deteriorate. The board of the BVR decreed a new bridge was required. The new bridge needed to be light and hinged at one end so that we could gain access to the garden. So the engineering department set to work, 3D models were produced for review, and once approval was given, fabrication drawings were drawn up. A temporary closure notice was given and construction commenced. The pressure was on, a gala day was imminent. The bridge is made from aluminium sections held together with stainless steel nuts and bolts. The north end of the bridge is hinged and carefully arranged so the track is aligned. The south end rests on the bridge abutments, but the height is adjustable using set screws that pass through the end platform, which then rest on the abutment below. Sliding expansion joints were provided in the track to allow for thermal expansion of the bridge. Following successful construction and commissioning, the bridge was declared fit for purpose and services resumed. This locomotive is a scale model of a Deckerville 040 pannier tank engine. We are watching her inaugural run on the BVR. The model has been manufactured by Accucraft and distributed through their German dealer network. I've always enjoyed the aesthetic appearance of these engines, but the model is currently unavailable. I thought I had missed the chance to acquire one. Then the opportunity arose to purchase one from the second-hand stand at the 2019 16mm Association AGM. I could not resist her charms. A deal was struck and she joined the BVR Loco roster. We're now going to look at Murton Emerys, which was originally manufactured by David Taylor of Steamcraft fame. The model is a semi-scale representation of a Festiniog Railway double fairlie. The above photograph was taken from the book 16mm Scale Live Steam Model Locomotives Volume 1, written by the late Peter Dobson and published in 1985. Volume 2 never materialised, but I believe Derek Wiggins, known for his support and fondness of the 16mm heritage scene, has considered taking this on. Let's hope he does. I believe Steamcraft were the first manufacturer to commercially produce a live steam 16mm scale model of a double fairlie. My model was originally owned by the late Arthur Walker from the Guildford Model Engineering Society. Arthur loved anything that was of unusual nature or continental origin. Murton Emerys did not fit into this remit, so he decided to sell the model and I was fortunate enough to acquire it. The original model employed two miniature blow lamps to heat the boiler, which wailed like a banshee. You can hear them in these archive recordings I made during the early 1990s at a GMES summer rally. The engine was originally 45mm gauge, which was okay to run on the GMS outdoor garden railway layout, but I wanted to run it on my own fledgling Ash Valley Railway, which was 32mm gauge. I decided to re-gauge the power gauges, and whilst I was at it, I refined the frames and visible motion work. Also, a new gas-fired ceramic tile burner assembly was designed and fitted, plus larger capacity gas tanks. Finally, a completely new superstructure was fabricated to mimic the early 1970s style of the original prototype. Earlier, I mentioned Derek Wiggins, who owned one of these models years ago but sold it. He has regretted doing so since. Fortunately, he found another one, and David Taylor rebuilt it for him to the original condition, but he did change the burners. This gives me an opportunity to mention Throwback Modeller, which is an internet magazine publication compiled by Derek Wiggins and Nigel Town. It focuses on the heritage scene and is a thoroughly good read. So the model you see running on my line is nothing like the original. It represents Murton Emerys as running in the early 1970s, just before he was converted to oil firing. I took these photographs at Port Maddock, as it was then known, in my early teenage years. They were invaluable later on. Modifications were limited to what could be done by the constraints imposed by the original model. The model ran for a number of years, but failed a hydraulic boiler test in the late 1990s, with what I thought at the time was a weeping boiler bush. For a number of reasons, I thought a new boiler was required, so Murton Emerys was put into store until I could tackle the repair at some later date. Roll forward 20 years and I decided to have another look at the model. I conducted another hydraulic test, but there was no evidence of water weeping from the bush. So I steamed the loco, but after 20 minutes there was evidence of a steam leak. Not from the bush in the boiler, but from a blanking plug that was fitted in the boiler bush. This blanking plug had been fitted to the engine by some previous owner, who had cut and ground it flush with the bush. To cure the problem, I had to remove it, and the only way to do this would be by drilling it out and using a self-tapping extractor. I decided to centre pop the bush before drilling it, so I lightly tapped the end of the plug with my centre punch and hammer, whereupon the punch went straight through the blanking plug. The plug was made of mild steel, and it had rotted away. No wonder it leaked. I cleaned and re-threaded the bush, then made a replacement blanking plug. I'm pleased to say the boiler successfully passed a hydraulic test. Whilst the engine was in pieces, I also addressed some other issues I had encountered. Primarily replacing the graphite yarn packing on the pistons with modern O-rings, and addressed some over-lubrication problems that the engine had. I suppose I should really call this engine Brasso, because it is a standing joke within the GMS fraternity that I am notorious for not painting my own built engines. But why rush these things? I've waited 20 years. Samson is a Peter Angus Ron Cushing hybrid and was originally mess fired. I'm not a great fan of mess firing in 16mm scale, so I made a new centrifuge boiler and gas tank, but after a number of years my home built boiler developed a leak at the fire tube backplate joint. The silver solder had not penetrated properly. I did a quick repair followed by a hydraulic test. As the loco was stripped down, I decided to give the loco a repaint. You see him here on his recommissioning trials. One of the greatest pleasures being an owner of a garden railway is to share it with your friends and loved ones. As you know, I am a member of the Guildford Model Engineering Society, where I run my trains on the garden railway layout. Some members of the group have their own garden railway, and they open their lines up for us to run on. I was eager to reciprocate the invitation as soon as the layout was fit for some public running. So the BVR hosted 3 open days during 2019. The trouble with having mates visiting your line is you're too busy acting the host, so there's very little opportunity to record what happened. Fortunately, Charles Hannaford took some still pictures, and some are included here. Kim Jackman brought along his Roundhouse Darjeeling loco.
Maybe I'll progress from a sander to a fireman, yes. Or even a cold breaker to a sander.
Looks like he missed out on his true vocation. Meanwhile, Alan Campling was running his battery-powered Hornby tinplate models. This set me thinking, A steam-powered Romney Hythe and Dymchurch Pacific look-alike would be good. Something from the basic low O-gauge range might be possible. Bill Reed, more known for his gauge-1 exploits, had recently crossed from the dark side to the light side by running his new Accucraft Minton Advanced model Yeo with some appropriate coaches. Gerald James' model of Lilla, manufactured by Roundhouse, had just passed Yeo at Barkham and was heading for Swing Tunnel. Over at Loston Bodge Engine Shed, Graham Bone is preparing his Hunslip. This model comes from the Accucraft 7/8 scale range. It has been superbly painted and weathered by Simon Harris from Model Earth Designs. The figures and wagons are also produced by Simon. He has the ability to capture the atmosphere of a prototype in miniature and paint. He's a true artist, has a real eye for reality. And finally, we see Roger Hayward's freelance locomotive, Sir Harold. The model is completely scratch built to his own design and features valve gear that is similar to a Swiss rack loco, where the pistons drive a lay shaft, which in turn drives the connecting rod and the internal valve timing eccentrics. Up to now, you have heard me talk about 3D design and modelling, primarily related to building the railway foundations and structures. Of course, the same processes can be used in our normal modelling. This becomes even more attractive when you want to make multiples of the same thing, especially if you are making masters for lost wax casting. In the past, I have made computer models and had them printed by Shapeways, who are a specialist internet-based print house. I took this approach because I believed domestic 3D printers were not capable of giving me the quality I wanted. However, the situation is changing. For domestic use, there are two basic types. The first is FDM, where heat extruded plastic rod is placed onto a platform and built up in layers, but can give a reasonably good finish. The second type is liquid resin, which is laid down in layers and known as SLA. It's capable of some incredible results. Models are created from an image generated on a screen that forms a mask. Ultraviolet light then shines through the mask, which solidifies the exposed resin. But then along come 3D resin print machines at a very competitive price, making home printing affordable. But before you can print, you need some models, so I'll come back to printing later. A lot of people are daunted by this CAD process. As you know, I use MicroStation for all my 3D modelling. So I thought I would dispel this myth and give a very brief introduction to the basics, plus some tips how to manage the task. Models are built up from objects and shapes that can be merged to form a whole. This could be done as one big piece, but it's far easier to break an object down into parts. CAD packages use something called levels, or layers, where each part can be assigned to a particular level. Levels can then be switched on or off, making visibility easier. If you switch all of them on, you can't see the wood for the trees. I tend to work in wireframe mode, which makes attaching parts to others easier. Once the model is finished, it is exported as a stereolography file, or STL, ready for the next stage. Most domestic printers build models by placing layers of material on top of each other. That means the model we have just created in CAD must be cut up into layers, or slices as this is known. I use Chitubox slicing software to do this. Here is the same CAD model imported into Chitubox, and as you can see, I will be printing 4 copies of the same model in one go, which is another advantage resin printers have over the extruded method. You can see how each layer is generated by the software as we move through the cut model. So we are now ready to print. The slice file has been saved and loaded into the printer memory. Resin is added to the tank and off we go. The model is suspended from the generator platform, which moves up and down, creating one layer at a time. But don't forget, we are making 4 models in one go. The final stage is to wash the printed model in isopropyl alcohol, then cure the resin with ultraviolet light. I would thoroughly recommend using a proprietary wash and cure machine such as this one from Anycubic. It's a lot less messy. So that's my very basic introduction to CAD and 3D printing. There's so much more that can be shown, but this is not the forum for doing that. For more information, I recommend using the internet and YouTube, which are great sources of information and guidance. Hope I've whetted your appetite to have a go. Well, here we are at the end of the Blackwater Valley Railway 2019 review. I hope you enjoyed it. During this presentation I've concentrated on the story behind the line, its construction and visually on more complete sections of the railway. In 2020 I plan to work on Chuffam and wheelbarrow stations, adding a lot more plants and features. Plus we will be building the standard gauge branch interchange line from Gatesend to Wheelbarrow Hall. So please join us for more BVR Diaries sometime in the future. Take care, bye for now.